Morning all. I'd like to show you this amazing picture. You may not have seen it before. It's absolutely stunned Facebook. It's like an X-Men picture. If you follow the film series The X-Men, a young 8-year-old by the name of Samuel Reshevsky is in France here, and apparently some of these players may have been quite strong, master strength they're described as. Well, there's some controversy about that. The picture is very revealing for lots of things. The clothing at the time, demo boards are very nice. It looks to be very nice pieces and very nice sets. He's playing white, which is the convention of most symbols. I assume he's playing white on all the boards. For an 8-year-old to do this, what happened later to Samuel Reshevsky? Why isn't he being talked about as much as the official world champions? I think when someone becomes world champion, there's a natural boost in publicity. Everyone wants to know their games. But Reshevsky was, often a world championship contender, and he won the US championship many times. He even had a match actually with Fischer. One of his great achievements, which he's very proud of, was in a book called Great Chess Upsets, which I happen to have. And prior to stumbling on this picture, I was reading this annotation, and it was Reshevsky against Capablanca, and to my surprise, it ended with something like, and this was my great upset. The surprising victory was the beginning of my chess career as an adult. And I realised that, okay, this is the author of the book. The author of the book, Samuel Reshevsky, Great Chess Upsets. So let's have a look later at this game when Reshevsky was about 22 years old. It was played in Margate. And also let's talk about Reshevsky more generally for other achievements as well. Okay, let's have a look at Samuel Reshevsky's game against Capablanca, played in Margate 1935. Margate is a seaside resort in England. It held the first of 5 consecutive international tournaments in the spring of 1935. The former world champion Capablanca was invited to participate, and he did, and Samuel Reshevsky participated on behalf of the United States. We also had Ernst Ludwig Klein from Austria, and the remaining 7 were masters from the United Kingdom, including Fairhurst, Vera Menchik, Mieses, Milner Barry, Patrick Riley, Edward Sargent, George Allen Thomas. Okay, so the young Reshevsky at this time was only 23 years old, playing with the white pieces against Capablanca. He kicked off with d4. Capablanca played knight f6, after c4, e6, knight c3, d5. We see queen's gambit declined, bishop g5, knight bd7, and now the exchange variation, which is one of Reshevsky's pet systems. So e takes d5, e3, bishop e7, bishop d3, all standard stuff so far. Black castled, queen c2, and a very, very common move played is actually c6. This keeps the structure quite solid with c6. It will take a long time for any undermining of black structure here. A less played move, though, far less played, is played by Capablanca. Here's c5. This carries a structural risk, really, that white has the option to often take later on with d takes c, exposing an isolated queen's pawn. So structurally it's a bit unsafe compared to c6, which is the most common move in this position. There's the classic minority attack, of course, after c6. If white later plays minority attack, it's like this, to try and cause structural damage and isolate a pawn and a backward c pawn, but it takes a long time to do that. Black can do lots of stuff on the king side, etc. So okay, so c5, let's see, knight f3, And even more daring now from Capablanca is to play c4. So this is okay, maybe if black gets his way, this will be very useful for later squashing white on the king side. We see bishop f5. The thing is, it has left the d pawn behind, so is the d pawn going to be a liability or not? Rook e8 is played, and after castles g6, and the bishop just drops back now to h3. Knight f8, offering an exchange of light square bishops. This is taken off, rook takes c8, and now white voluntarily takes on f6. He's trying to weaken the d5 pawn. So after bishop takes f6, white is really trying to prove this structure is a little bit unsafe with that d5 pawn. It's only protected by the queen, and in fact there's an undermining move now played in the form of b3. It's difficult for black to consider recapturing. If c takes, then queen takes b3, and how does black actually defend d5? This would actually, let's put on the kibitz here, this would actually be much better for white, this position. There's no real defense of d5. That shows what a liability it is already. Capablanca now tried queen a5, and there's a very energetic resource which white played here, which doesn't completely forget about the d5 pawn. It's b4. Just try and get a rook on the 7th. If this is taken, this could be quite unpleasant in other respects. But also d5 is loose here anyway as well. So after rook ab1, say queen a5, rook takes b7. This is still dangerous for things like rook b5. So d5 is still a sitting target. Okay, so Capablanca retreats his queen to d8, protecting that d5 rather meekly. And now we see a really great move here, positionally, and it just shows this d5 pawn is like a fatal flaw potentially in black's position. The variations just keep echoing this. Can you see what white played here? A very strong positional move now. If I gave you 10 seconds, it's not a spectacular combinative move. So 10 seconds starting from now. What would you play with white? Okay, it's remarkably powerful in the scheme of things. Queen a4. And you might think, well, okay, there's two options for black. Either a6 or rook a8. Now a6 was played, but if rook a8, that's terrible because of queen b5. d5 is a problem here. Black's losing a pawn again. Now if a6 is forced, well, this is what happened. Now white can play b5. So he's going to get some pressure now on b7 potentially, unless black considers something like a5. But a5 is not actually possible here. If a5, b6 is strong because of this knight takes d5 if queen takes b6. For example, this would be horrible. Or queen takes a5 here, just winning a pawn. So a5 is not possible. So there we have now a b file to work with. So rook ab1. White has a small advantage to work with. Now rook b2, preparing to double. If you can double rooks, then b takes a will be very dangerous. You know, using the pin with pressure on b8 potentially. Bishop e7. But after this move now, actually, if rook fb1 here, it seems as though a5 is now possible because the rook, the idea of the rook to stop, okay, b6 to discourage b6 or not, nope, it's not to do with that, it's to do with bishop b4 here. The rook is attacking b6 now, and also c3, so this will be very unpleasant. So a5, after rook fb1, a5 is actually possible, and given that, actually a stronger move is played. B takes a6 instead. So this leaves pressure on b7. d5 again, a liability echoed in these variations. If taking here, we just take on b8 and then take on d5. So Capablanca is forced to play rook takes a6, queen drops back. Now knight e6 is played, rook fb1, nice frontal pressure on b7 for the moment to work with. Rook a7, passive placing of pieces. a4. Now knight c7 is played. Okay, now a very enterprising plan is about to be introduced, but first a tactic. Knight e5, can you spot the threat? Yes, I think I've highlighted it. Knight c6 is now a killer threat for rook takes b8, so using that pressure on the b file, Capablanca parries it with queen e8, and now a positional plan is possible in the form of e4 is a tactical operation which wasn't played, but we see a much more profound positional plan instead to do with d5. The engine solution to this position is very dynamic indeed. It's the plan immediate e4 here. Let's have a look at this. For example, f6, knight g4, aiming to put pressure on the structure like this from e3. This is very difficult. Queen d7, for example, and here knight e3 is pretty strong, or queen e2 is pretty strong. For example, with queen e2, d takes check, taking the pawn with check, d5, and this is very difficult for black indeed, this sort of position. But okay, that's an energetic solution here to play e4, but this is very interesting positioning as well. f4. White is saddling himself with potentially weak e-pawn though, but he's got this knight maneuver plan in mind to go to g4 to f2, which is just vacated, to d1. So this knight can go to b5 to knock out the defender of d5, and the pressure can be renewed with knight c3. So quite an elaborate plan, all with f4. Amazing. What a deep plan for f4 and this d5 square. Capablanca using that knight protecting d5 at the moment, so that's going to be taken off with knight b5, and that's going to replace its fellow knight via this route. Remarkable. So after f6, knight g4, queen d7, we see actually not an immediate knight f2 here though. Let's have a quick look at knight f2. f5, maybe it doesn't make much of a difference, but in this position h3 was played. King g7, knight f2, the plan is carried out. Bishop a3, okay, the rook moves, bishop d6. Now carrying on with the plan, f5 now locking down the e3 pawn, but provides another undermining point potentially with g4 in the form of g4 at the right time. Something to bear in mind. Knight b5, trying to knock out the defender of d5 again. Rook a5. So the defender of d5 is taken away and replaced. The plan has been carried out, but it needs to have another plan now because it's still not easy. This rook is now also guarding d5. Queen d6 is played, queen f2, aiming for f3, then d5, and then doubling, and then rook b5. So the next plan, but the thing is a3's got to be covered as well. It's going to be careful about a3 because that could be a potentially dangerous threat. For the moment, b6, queen f3, building more pressure on d5. Rook d8, rook ab2, queen e7, and now here, queen a3 is a latent threat here, and this is demonstrated if rook b5. Actually, queen a3 is equalish here from an engine point of view, attacking this knight. It's a nuisance. The knight can't move without dropping a4. This would be an advantage for black, so it's a nuisance threat, latent threat here. So we see a much slower approach, cautious, rook b4 for the moment. Rook d7. So Capablanca's patiently defending d5. So at move 39 now, king h1, bishop d8. But now a second front of attack, g4, trying to break this binds on this backward e pawn. In fact, Capablanca obliges. He doesn't want his structure isolated like that. If two isolated pawns, if g takes happened, or this g file could be dangerous. He just takes on g4 here, and it looks as though, isn't it weakening white's king? Well, there's not enough pieces around the king to exploit that vacuum, so it looks safe enough. Queen d6, king g1, and the king is usefully getting out of the way here potentially for the rooks to use the h file. Bishop c7, king f2, rook f7, and it looks like this is dangerous, isn't it? And in fact, g5 now, bishop d8. It looks as though g5 might be a threat, but on the other hand, b6 has to be nannied here with that bishop. King e2, and here Capablanca did seem to lose patience. He could have carried on this position quite patiently, protecting b6 and protecting d5 with the move queen e6. For example, king d2, queen f5, now threatening queen d3 check, as well as potentially bishop g5, but that's always parried with rook b6. But so the main threats here, queen d3 check. If the queen has to go back to protect d3, then this backward pawn is a problem. Rook e7. You know, black hasn't got any clear. There's no clear infiltration to get to black or exploit the d pawn, because white's stuck with this backward e pawn here. But yeah, this is an uncharacteristic, perhaps, mistake from the great Capablanca. He played bishop takes g5 here. This allows white to crash through on the b file. Rook takes b6 is played. Okay, queen a3, and now a little bit surprising maybe the use of the king here in the middle game, just protecting that knight, because otherwise a4 is going to drop if the knight moves. But this is sufficient to do king d2 in this position. And white's now threatening, you know, rook b7. So bishop e7, rook b7. There's a lot of pressure now on black. In fact, what is like a concrete threat? Well, maybe just infiltrating with the other rook is starting to build pressure. Here, Capablanca tries rook takes a4, which is a really clever tactical idea, echoing that d3 square is a bit vulnerable for white's king. Perhaps, though, better might have been just something like rook f5, just holding up d5 solidly. Okay, but it's a little bit more committal. Rook takes a4. The very clever tactical idea is, if taking, then check is really dangerous. Here, if king e1, then bishop h4 is very, very nasty, winning white's queen. And even just as bad, really, king c1, there'll be bishop a3 check. And if here, knight b2, then just losing the rook. And if rook comes back, then c3, and black's winning. So this trap is avoided, though. It's ignored. Rook takes a4 is ignored, and white instead scoops up that d5 pawn, which a vast amount of moves have been designed to try and pressurize. It's taken now, finally, at move 49. Capablanca's in a bad state here. White's got a simple plan now, potentially, of just doubling on the 7th rank. But there's other very dangerous resources creeping in here, like this rook infiltration and queen e5 check. Black plays rook a5 and drops the c4 pawn. This is a bad position for black. Capablanca tries now rook h5. This attack is fairly harmless here. It's not well supported by other pieces. The king just budges up to d3. Quite cosy there on d3. Queen a8. And now this seventh rank is a real problem. Queen e6 threatening to win a piece straight away. Rook takes e7. Queen a3 protecting the bishop. And here rook d7 with now the threat of rook b3 and just winning the bishop. You might think, well, hold on, isn't rook b3 also in this position? Well, there's queen nuisance queen move perhaps in this position to factor in. If rook takes e7, there's nuisance checks, and that could be dangerous for the white king. This is unpleasant indeed. So it's not needed to do this. The queen counterplay has to be restricted. So rook d7 for the moment. And we see actually now it's very difficult for black to do anything that constructive. Capablanca tries rook hf5, and now we see just rook b3, taking the queen away, not minding the queen coming to the first rank here, losing that piece. But after check, now just king d2. The knight is much safer to play knight e2 in this position without the rook lurking around on the 7th rank, and Capablanca resigns here. And you might wonder, okay, hold on, let's rewind just for a moment here. Could this rook have kept around the 7th rank? Why did it have to go to f5? What was white actually threatening? After this rook d7, what was white actually threatening? Well, it gives time for rook bb7. I think that's the main threat here. The queen can't do anything in this position at the moment. White's simply going to double on the 7th rank. If we have a move like rook h2, just to trying to be useful, it's not. I don't think it's useful in time. If the rooks double, say queen a1, trying to simulate what we had before. Now rook takes e7. In fact, the king has e4 in this position. So check. There's king e4, and the king actually can start making use of e5, a nasty king walk. Check. King d6, and the checks run out here. White's clearly better, so it was no use keeping the rook around for that 7th rank. White's 7th rank infiltration is already winning the position after this rook d7, so the attack's really crashing through here. I thought this was a fine positional game, and it was the start, it marked the start of Samuel Reshevsky's career. I hope you enjoyed it. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.